What's up, grinders? So today we're going to do something meta. We're going to be doing a review of Steve Kaufmann's video, which is a react to IAmMarkManson's. Now, I have no idea who IAmMarkManson is, but obviously I know who Steve Kaufmann is because, well, he's very well known within the language learning community. And you may have also noticed that I got myself a new mic, which means I can finally do that language ASMR stuff I was thinking about all those years ago. You know, that type of stuff. But let's get back to the topic at hand.
I see that all the time. I have never found that to be useful advice. Forget the first 100 words. You can't treat random people as tutors. Today, I want to talk...
Okay, I know Steve Kaufmann speaks Chinese, but you can treat random people as tutors. I've had it done to me so many times. A great example of this is basically when I went to, China, and I'd be hanging out with my wife's friends and stuff, and they would just randomly bring a kid along, and I'm pretty sure they brought him along because they knew I was here. And I would turn and look at this kid, and I would start speaking to the kid in Chinese because I want to practice my Chinese. And then I'd get the side eye from the mum, like, "What are you doing? Speak English. That's why I brought them," type of thing. So it became quite evident to me that you can be pushed into a tutoring situation quite rapidly if you're in the right environment for it. And some parents are very good at making you do it. And then obviously I would force them into basically becoming Chinese tutors as recompense. But I just thought I would point that out because it's kind of a funny thing.
Talk about 25 tips to learn a foreign language.
Jesus, 25 tips. That sounds hard.
This is based on a blog post written by Mark Manson. Someone pointed out that this was an interesting collection of tips.
I was actually kind of hoping that this was going to be like a video of a video, so you would have like a meta type of thing with 3 heads just all yelling at each other.
For language learning. So I thought it would be interesting to go through these 25 tips and give you my take on these tips, how relevant, how useful they are. Bear in mind that language learning is very personal, so what I like or dislike may not be the same as what you like or dislike or what Mark Manson likes or dislikes.
It's good that he started with that because there's so many language learning, gurus that exist on YouTube, and they're basically like, you must do this, you must do that. So it is refreshing, that someone's actually saying, there's different ways to approach this, because whenever I say that, I actually get a lot of hate comments.
His first tip is conversation. Now, he was, I think, living in Buenos Aires and faced with a
Okay, so I got an idea of where this one's heading. This is almost heading along the Benny Lewis path of start talking from day one type of thing. Now, the problem is you're not actually talking. You're sprouting out a couple of, generic phases. I am all for conversation as soon as you can get to that point, but you're not going to be doing this from day one. And I'm not sure if the assumption here is you've already got a basis within the language. If you haven't, you're not going to be doing conversation on day one. It's going to be a very, very, very long time before you do anything that's even akin to a conversation. The best you'll be doing is getting out some generically, some generic phases that you've previously just memorized type of thing, and then nodding when you hear the response, but you don't actually know what's being said.
Difficulty of communicating with locals. So in that situation, if you're in a country where the language is spoken and you need to learn that language, of course, you take advantage of every opportunity to use the language. However, as a strategy for learning the language, I have never considered conversation, at least in the initial stages, to be the key, because you can't have a conversation if you don't understand what the other person is saying. So I am much more inclined to prefer heavy input-based approach to language learning and wait until you have a high enough level of comprehension to where you can have adult conversations with people. And at that point, yes.
Okay, well, if you're going to wait that long, having adult conversations with people, most likely that means you've done just pure input up to this point, which means you've probably spent, a good 1,500 hours for a similar language and then thousands of hours for a more distant language, which here comes the crux of the matter. What do you need from this language? So for example, when I learned Chinese, I pretty much started trying to speak from day one because it was critical for me to be able to actually use this language because that's what I needed on day one. Now, for a language such as Spanish, which I'm learning as kind of an experiment on the side, I have no need for this language. I don't know anyone who speaks Spanish around me. I'm not going to go to a Spanish-speaking country anytime soon, so I can just sit there and absorb content over the long term and just do it that way, and then eventually one day down the track actually start speaking. So realistically, you have to follow not even the advice, you need to make a choice based on your own needs.
You do need to speak a lot. The second thing he says is intent.
And also, I just want to add to that, he pointed out it's because you're not going to be able to understand the other person if you try conversation from day one. Well, it really depends on so many different things. You could do conversation with tutors from very, very early on, and that will help reinforce what you're hearing as well. So it can actually help with input a lot. So output and input work quite nicely together.
Intensity of study trumps length of study. Well, intensity, yes. And I do remember when I was learning Mandarin Chinese, I had 3 hours a day, one-on-one with the teacher, and then I would spend 5 or 6 or 7 hours on my own, listening and reading and writing and learning characters. And I learned in 1 year faster than other diplomatic students, as with the Canadian government in Hong Kong, who took 2 years and learned less well.
And this makes total sense, because what you're doing there is you're putting your brain under an insane amount of stress with those types of hours. And your brain is smart enough to recognize that this is something it needs to survive day to day, because now you're doing this for the vast majority of your day. Therefore, it's going to dedicate, the vast majority of its resources to learning this. And even though you're going to learn a lot every day, and you're going to dump a lot every day because you're not going to remember it day to day, the fact that you're doing it so frequently is just like an insane SRS algorithm happening in your head. Basically, you're reviewing over and over and over with these types of hours. And we know this works because pretty much any intense defense language school works using this methodology. It smashes you with learning. Now, obviously, this then comes back to the fact that the majority of people don't have this, so it's not really something that's that useful of a point. If you have the hours and you want to dedicate the hours, great, do that every single day. But for the vast majority of people, we just don't have the hours. So intensity versus duration, it's not really that important of a question.
So I remember I came to the conclusion at that time that creating that white heat in your brain that comes from intensity is very helpful. But we continue to learn. So even after a period of very intense learning, it continues to gestate in your brain, and there are other opportunities to use the language, and you are always improving over a long, long period of time. Number 3, he says, classes suck and are an inefficient use of time and money. One-on-one, as the way I had it in Hong Kong, with a new teacher every hour, forcing me to say something in the language, I think that was very good, very intense. However, sitting in a classroom with 10 people, with a teacher, especially if you have to travel a half hour or 45 minutes to get to the classes are expensive. In my case, the government was paying. If I had to pay for that myself, I wouldn't do it, because
I agree with everything that's been said by both parties here. Classes generally are a waste of time. You will be dragged down to the person who's the lowest common denominator in the classroom environment, and you generally can just make way better progress. Although there is one benefit to classes, and that's the fact that you're surrounded with other people doing exactly what you're doing, and that's kind of like a little bit of a boost, I guess. But you can get that through other means. So, for example, I have my Discord. It will be in the pinned link down below, and there's lots of channels in there depending on your language, and you can basically sit in there and just egg each other on type of thing. So that one tiny benefit of a class it's not really that important. Realistically, I can't think of many scenarios where a classroom-based learning for a language is actually that beneficial beyond what I've mentioned, and maybe also the fact that if you actually follow through and do the class every day, it's a form of, keeping yourself, I guess, on task type of thing. But most people can do that without a class, and as he said, they're generally just very expensive.
We can achieve so much on our own, listening and reading, and then eventually finding an opportunity to use the language. Number 4, know your motivation for learning a new language. That's important. I was listening to a podcast, How Stuff Works or something, to Americans, and they were saying, why would you learn a language? Is it just for showing off? No, I don't think why most people learn languages, but it may be the case for some. So you have to look at yourself.
I had a really weird experience around this years ago, so with Esperanto, which was really strange. Okay, so I remember I was at an Esperanto event, and then after the event, we went and ate at a pub, basically, and there was one person there who had an assistant, helping them get around type of thing. This assistant was not in any way an Esperanto speaker, so they were just there to help this other person. And randomly halfway through the thing, they're like, why do you guys learn Esperanto? And they gave out the generic reasons of, it's not a language that anyone uses, blah, blah, blah. But then they included the most random point at the end. They said, I feel like Esperanto is a language that white people learn to make themselves feel oppressed. And I was like, where did that come from? I didn't even respond to that. I just went, and I kind of turned, because you get the most random types of comments about those types of things. But let's go back to the topic, which is motivation. So yeah, motivation is very important. It gives you something to aim towards type of thing, and it also helps you direct your path. My motivation with Chinese is obviously, 1, it's family-based, but 2, I want to eventually have a channel where I play video games in Chinese. So I've got a very direct path to get to where I need to get to. I don't need to take all these side quests along the way, go learn about cooking and stuff, because it's probably not going to be relevant to the majority of things I'm going to do in the language, at least early on. So it can help you set goals.
Am I learning this language to show off? Am I learning to communicate with my grandmother? Am I learning it because I need it for work? Am I learning it because I'm interested in the culture? It's important to understand why you're doing it, because there are a lot of moments during the process when you are discouraged because you don't think you're getting anywhere, and you have to go back to like, why am I actually doing it? So that's a good point. Number 5.
Also, you need a kind of a counter to motivation. So motivation can keep you going forward, but it's also good to, in some way, register your progress as you've gone along. Because then when you do lose that motivation, and you've obviously got the grind, so you do the commitment every day of doing something in language, but even with that, you need something to look back and see your progress and go on, wow, I have actually made progress. So that could be just recordings of yourself, sitting here bumbling away. Put them on your computer, and then 6 months down the track when you don't feel like you're making any progress, go watch yourself, talking. And that's another good thing with actually speaking, is you can actually see your progress and you'll go, whoa, like I have improved so much, type of thing. So it's like another good way of just keeping moving forward. So motivation will not always keep you on the track. The grind will help you if you've got that mentality, which is what I promote a lot, the grind. But then also give yourself like actual motivation by creating content as you've gone along to look back upon to see that you've actually made progress.
He says, set learning goals. Well, I've said that in a general sense, my goal always is B2 on the European Common Framework of Reference.
I actually don't care about this European framework of reference. Half the time, I don't even remember what the numbers mean. I just know that C and C1, C2 is like high up type of thing. I guess now I probably am because I'm looking at it more. But my point being is I don't feel like this is a very good goal, at least for me. But for some people, they like to pass tests, and that's a great goal for them. So a goal also, and motivation, I feel like is kind of the same thing in a lot of ways.
Reference, which is kind of fluent with mistakes and places where you don't understand. That to me is the goal. Once you're there, you can continue to improve. But I very often don't achieve that. I move off a language where I'm still at A2 and I go to another language because I'm interested in it. So to me, at my stage, the goals aren't that important. When I was a Canadian government language student in Hong Kong learning Mandarin Chinese, I had a very specific goal. I had to write the British Foreign Service exam, and I said I want to do that within a year. So that was a very specific goal for a specific purpose.
Yeah, I'm definitely more in line with Steve here, especially with the goals and stuff, because I don't have a need for any of my languages, like an actual burning need. So it's more like just passion projects for me. So I can understand where he's coming from with this.
Not the situation now. And the goal will dictate what you do. Are you going to spend a lot of time writing? Are you going to maintain a diary? All the different things that you can do, many of which are hard work. If your goal is high enough, you will have the discipline to do these things. If you're more of a dilettante like me, you'll be more of a lazy language learner like I am. Next thing he says, start with the most common words, the 100 most common words. I see that all the time. I have never found that to be useful advice. If you are doing...
Yeah, so I can see where he's going to go with this. And I say, like a frequency list at the beginning is okay. It will help you progress. But not the 100 most common words. The 100 most common words are usually just grammatical markers within a language. So they're kind of like useless because you're going to learn them as soon as you start learning the language. Like you're going to get the 100 most common words pretty quickly. In fact, what you might want to do is just do like a course, some type of course online while doing a lot of input, and you're going to get those 100 words very, very quickly. It's like imagine trying to memorize in like a list format, and the, these types of words. It's like, it's kind of pointless. Like you need to see them in their grammatical context. However, the words that come after that, let's say the 300 to 1000, those words are pretty good. Like that will give you a pretty good bandwidth if you like go and study those in like on an Anki deck or something like that. That will make some good progress. But then also beyond that 1000, it's kind of pointless again because that's going to be based more on your domain of interest type of thing, where you want to take the language. So a frequency list is one of those things, again, where you as the individual know what you're going to need.
A lot of listening and reading or even speaking, you will encounter the most common 100 words, 500 words very, very often. However, the frequency declines very quickly, and the major challenge thereafter is going to be acquiring the less frequent words. But the most common words, they look after themselves. You needn't worry about it. And if your goal is to learn...
This is where I also don't like a pure comprehensible methodology of just like watching lots and lots of input, because what happens is those words that he was talking about, those ones that become less frequent, you have to watch more and more content to get them into your head. Basically, the sum of your content has to keep growing, where a card system such as Anki or something like that can actually offset that quite a bit, because you can put those less frequent words into there that you need, but you're not going to hear that very often. And then you can actually drill those, like increase their frequency artificially artificially so that you can actually learn them in context. And then as you're watching that like large amount of input, that content type of thing, when those words do finally randomly pop up, you're going to hear them and understand them pretty quickly. So like there's kind of like an offsetting between these two different systems that I think most people should follow, but people seem to radicalize towards one direction or the other.
The most common 100 words, so that you can go and start talking to someone, you will find, I think, in most cases, that you won't be able to follow the conversation anyway, because the person you're speaking to is not going to limit what they have to say to the 100 most common words. Number 7, he says, carry a pocket dictionary. I never carry a pocket dictionary, but dictionaries are very inefficient.
Yeah, well, I've got nothing against dictionaries. Like, I've got one on my phone for Chinese, and I find it quite helpful for, like, looking up characters because I can just draw them in type of thing. But, yeah, I think there's no downside to having a dictionary with you, and, like, realistically, it's not going to take up any, like, space for you. Just put it on your phone type of thing.
It takes time to find a word. You forget what the meaning was as soon as you close the dictionary. I just find, you end up saying, how do you say this? How do you say that? Could you please repeat? And you kind of struggle through if you have that kind of...
One thing I do, which is when I'm with, like, say, my wife or someone, and I hear a word a few times that I just don't know and I can't pick up context, I will literally ask, they will tell me, I'll write it down, and then I'll put it on my phone, like, I'll write it down. And then later that night, I will then slap it into Anki, give it some context, and actually learn it that way. So you can just jot down these words if you really want to learn them. So again, you don't need to, like, learn them instantly on the spot type of thing.
Of a rudimentary conversation. I prefer to prepare myself through lots of listening and reading and then hope for the best. So I don't carry a pocket dictionary. Number 8.
Yeah, so that hope for the best comment, you're going to be in that situation pretty much all the time with languages. However, you can improve your odds of understanding by engaging in content that's going to be related to the conversations that you engage in. So obviously, I'm not going to talk about video games much with my wife or stuff, but I'm going to be watching a lot of video games, so I'm going to study words related to those video games. And therefore, when I'm watching the content, it's going to help me because obviously I've been studying words related specifically to what I'm interested in. So you can improve your odds.
You keep practicing the new language in your head. Again, I never do that, not deliberately. Now, it may be that subconsciously I have these phrases bouncing around in my head, but I don't deliberately try to practice the new language in my head.
I do this. So I will often sit here and practice saying certain structures, swapping out the words and stuff, because that just really helps cement that actual structure within my brain. Maybe, like, I could probably hear that structure, and most of the times I would. I could hear the structure, I can understand the structure, but the problem is I can't produce it naturally because of some reason or another. Maybe my English brain somewhere in the back is, like, injecting some bad English grammar into the language. So I feel like if I practice the structure enough times, 6 times a couple of days, boom, I'm going to be able to produce that structure without any issues. And in fact, I made a video just recently about how to improve your speaking. So I disagree with that statement there. I think that, practicing in the comfort of your room, it's a safe way of doing it. It's a way to ensure that you're making good structures because you can check that against real content type of thing. So I think it's a really good way of practicing your speaking. I don't think practicing speaking just directly with a native when you haven't practiced it before is a really good idea at all, because you're going to be in this situation where you're just trying to, like, create phrases out of your head, and hopefully you've had enough input, and the vast majority of people will not by the time they first want to use the language.
Don't do that. That's not to say it's not a good thing to do. It's just not something that I can, do. You're going to say a lot of stupid things. I accept it. Yeah, I'm not sure it's stupid, but we are comfortable in our own language.
Okay, so it's good to see that Steve basically said then that that's something you can do, it's just not what he does. So he's not negating my point there.
Language, typically, we feel we are. If we're adults, we think we're adult, we think we're intelligent, we think we can express ourselves, and all of a sudden, in a new language, we can't, we make mistakes, we can't find the words. In a way, it's unpleasant, although there is the sort of compensating sense of achievement when, in fact, you are able to say something, you are able to understand, you get this tremendous power. But yeah, there are certainly periods of uncertainty, and you have to accept that.
This also brings me back to a conversation I've had around, like, pure comprehensible input methodology and why it's becoming so popular. And I know people say it's not a methodology. It is, guys. It's literally a methodology of sitting there, watching tons and tons of content, doing nothing else until you feel like you're at a level where you can speak the language. It's basically become its own methodology. I know comprehensible input is also the name of, how we pick up knowledge and stuff like that. But, like, it's also a methodology. Now, that methodology of just sitting there, absorbing content and not speaking seems to be extremely popular among those who are very introverted and they don't want to risk making mistakes type of thing. And I understand why people like that path. And that's why I'm not against it, because everyone's different. Me being more of an extrovert, although when I was younger I was very introverted. I kind of retrained myself, and yes, that is something you can retrain yourself in. It takes a lot of effort and it's kind of terrifying, but you can retrain yourself in it. Just go do an acting course and then be forced on stage, and eventually you get used to it like anything else. But I feel that I make a lot more progress when I actually go out, use the language, and I can see, the mistakes that I make and what I need to, go back and work on, type of thing.
Number 10, he says, figure out pronunciation patterns, and he makes reference to Slavic languages and Romance languages, which have certain patterns. I would rather here say, when it comes to pronunciation, focus on intonation. If you can get the intonation of a language, the rhythm of the language, then the pronunciation is going to improve.
Okay, so with this, I would say at the very early stages, you want to get your pronunciation right. Like, you want to be able to pronounce the sounds within the language. However, the rest of this stuff, and especially with Chinese, tones or any tonal language, you want to get that stuff right from pretty early on. However, the rest of it, like the intonation and, how the general sentences flow and stuff, that you will kind of start to understand as you pick up from a lot of input.
Correct usage is going to improve. You should
However, if you find that you're still not doing that well, that's where shadowing can come quite handy.
Listen to that intonation and try to imitate it. Number 11, he says, use audio and online courses for the first 100 words and basic grammar. Well, I've covered the first 100 words. I don't think that's important. They'll come at you anyway. Basic grammar, again, it's hard to nail down the basic grammar. You'll be struggling with basic grammar for a long, long time. He mentions various apps. He doesn't mention links.
There's definitely some grammar that you want to study early on. For example, you want to know, how the basic tense system works, what the basic subject, verb, object order and stuff is. Now, you could get this just from pure input, but funnily enough, you could probably get most of the basic grammar that you need to understand within a couple of days. But if you do a pure input approach, it could take you weeks before your brain starts to figure out the basic grammar. So you might as well just give yourself a little bit of a boost, and then when you start doing the input, you've already got that all under your belt. There's certain things where just studying it outright will massively accelerate you, and then there's certain things where just doing pure input will help you a lot more. So it's not like this black or white approach. Just think about it logically. Is this something that I could learn quite quickly? If I actively study it, then I'm going to actively study it. Is this something where I just need a lot of content to, see it in all its different contexts? Well, then I'm going to do a lot of content.
Unfortunately. Fine, yeah, there's all kinds of apps and tools and resources online that are going to help you, but the focus should be on acquiring the language, not necessarily just the first 100 words, not necessarily the basic grammar. Both of those things are going to continue to elude you for quite a while. Number 12, he says, after the first 100 words, focus on becoming conversational. Again, I don't know what that means.
So also when it comes to the grammar and acquiring the language, this is something that's been pointed out a lot by people who are learning, languages like Polish or Latin and stuff like that. There comes a time where you're going to have to learn the grammar a lot of the time. Otherwise, you'll be speaking with a broken version of the language down the track. So there's points where some grammar you're not going to be able to avoid. You're not going to be able to just acquire without putting insane amounts of hours into it. So you're better off just actively learning that. And then when you hear it, it will be reinforced by what you're hearing, type of thing. So don't think, Steve's against grammar, so, maybe I shouldn't be doing any grammar. There's a good bit of both. Just, do some grammar, do some input.
You are not going to be conversational with 100 words. Forget the first 100 words. Even forget trying to be conversational at an early stage.
I agree with all of that.
Focus on improving your comprehension, acquiring vocabulary. Speak when you have the opportunity. You're not going to be comfortably conversational until you have a sufficient vocabulary and a sufficient level of comprehension.
Well, technically, you can actually practice conversation very, very, very early on. And there's the YouTube channel where I think it's called Language Matrix. I've done a review of him before. And basically, he talks about how the military method, that's what he talks about, can do this. And I agree with what he says there, where you can actually practice the most basic of conversation, where you have one sentence, one set reply, and you can go backwards and forwards type of thing with this. So you can practice conversation way before you've got a very large vocab. Now, obviously, you're not going to have natural conversations, but you can start this practicing early on, and it will reinforce what you're hearing.
He says aim for the brain melt. Sure, I think I understand what he's saying. Go at it as intensively as you can, and you will be engaging with the language. It's kind of occupying your every waking moment. And interestingly, whatever you've done before going to bed or during the day, during the sleeping hours, that is being reinforced and put into your...
Now, here's an interesting parallel. So, for example, when you get into fitness, I haven't been in fitness for a while, if you probably haven't noticed, but when you're in fitness, you want to basically work yourself until you're, what do they call it? The point of failure, basically. You're basically about to fail, but you don't. So it's the same thing with language learning. Like, you could take it very relaxed, just like you could take fitness, but you're not going to make many gains. But if you do like a nice hard session of, language learning, and you exhaust your brain a little bit, then you're going to make progress, because the brain is just another muscle. So like a lot of the things that we apply here in language learning, and I talk about on this channel, they're not exclusive to language learning. The grind is not like a language learning thing. It's something that can be applied to anything. Tracking your progress, not a language learning thing, apply to anything. And then intensity, exhausting yourself at the topic. And I'm not talking like exhausting yourself until you're going to die type of thing. I mean, like just putting enough effort in that you feel tired afterwards, you're going to make progress because you're exercising that muscle. And just like anything with like fitness, you shouldn't just keep doing the exact same exercise every single day, hitting the exact same muscle. That's why you should just be listening. You should be talking, listening, reading, if you can, writing, try and mix it up, because you're going to be hitting your brain from all these different angles, and it's like hitting a muscle group from all sorts of angles.
Long-term memory. So the more intense that experience, the bigger the brain melt, I guess, the faster you're socking it into your brain. Use a new language daily only in the sense that listening and reading are also using the language. It's simply not practical to be speaking daily, but you should try.
Well, I speak daily. I have no issue doing that. You can speak daily to yourself. But yes, you should be doing something daily.
Try to maintain some consistency of engaging with the language. And so that's certainly good advice. Number 15, how do you say X is the most important sentence you can possibly learn? Again, I don't agree with that. How do you say X is not difficult to say? You will learn that early, but it's not a major help. I think you'll find yourself saying, I beg your pardon, could you repeat that more often? Because when we speak, we tend
I think both sentences are quite handy, realistically. And realistically, you're going to learn both very early on, so it's not something worth debating.
to limit ourselves to what we can say and the words that we have. Number 16, he says, one-on-one tutoring is the best and most efficient use of time. It's the best and most efficient type of tutoring or classroom learning one-on-one. I don't believe in sitting with a group of 5 or 6 or 10 and taking turns conversing. Some are better than others.
I've done tutoring for Chinese. I wanted to try it out, so I did a fair few lessons for Chinese, even though my wife is Chinese, because I wanted to see, with actual teachers. And I recorded the lessons, and I found, they were good, but overall I probably made a lot more progress than when I was just sitting here by myself studying, because what happens in a tutoring lesson is you often basically just try to hash out or say stuff or make conversation about things you already know how to say because you feel comfortable saying those things, and you may get like new words and stuff introduced, and that may help a little bit, but overall you're going to make a lot more progress just by yourself. However, some people just love chatting with another person and also getting like real-time feedback, so it can be good. I've just found it's better just to do it by yourself.
Not an efficient use of time, but I think that listening, reading, or dare I say using link can be at least as efficient a use of time as one-on-one tutoring. But you need a mixture. You need them all. The tutor is stimulating, it's feedback, it's all good. Number 17, date someone who speaks the target language.
This is a common one you'll definitely hear. I don't think this is actually like a good idea, like to purposely go out and try find someone who speaks the language that you're learning. In fact, most people that I found who have learned a language, they usually learn the language after they've met someone who speaks that language, and then they want to actually understand that person's family, their heritage and stuff like that. But I guess if this is how you're inclined, then there's nothing bad about it, but it just seems a little bit limiting to me.
And not your native language. I'm married, so it doesn't apply. You're selectively, removing anyone who speaks English if your native language.
Yeah, that's a good point. Steve just brought up there. This is the only thing you can do only once. Unless, of course, you plan to ditch that partner and get a new one with each language, which means I'd probably be up to my 3rd or 4th by now.
Language is English. Harder to find. I'm not sure how relevant that is as an activity. 18, if you can't find someone cute who will put up with you, find a language buddy online. Trouble with the language buddy is, again, I have to spend time teaching that person my language, English. So that's an hour for every hour I get of speaking to them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a waste of time.
In my target language. I would rather spend more time with input activities and then pay $10, $15, $20 an hour for an online tutor.
It's so much easier to do this. All you got to do is find a community that's using the language, let's say online. For example, for me, I just find some Chinese group that's discussing games I like. Join the group, type out Chinese, and if I mess it up, trust me, people are going to correct me. So I'm basically getting free tutoring. And then eventually I'll get kicked out of the group due to my bad Chinese, but there's plenty more groups to join.
When I want. Facebook chat plus Google Translate equals winning. Again, I'm not on Facebook. I don't have any interest in Facebook. Google Translate is useful for written communication. I think it's a little cumbersome trying to use it for oral communication. Number 20,
Like, this is obviously outdated. You could use any online tool. There's nothing special about Facebook or Google Translate.
Learn a new word, try to use it a few times right away. Again, a big part of language learning to me is that it be natural. I acquire so many words through listening and reading. I can't possibly use them all right away. There's no opportunity to use them. There's a gradual process where words that we have seen and we're starting to become familiar with eventually become passive vocabulary and eventually become active vocabulary. I don't think you can short circuit the process by trying to use them right away. And if you do, you'll only slow down your acquisition of a richer and richer passive vocabulary, which is a base that you need.
I don't agree with that. So often I will learn words and I won't try to use them right away, but I will put them into my Anki cards and then I will practice them. And then the next day, what will naturally happen is they'll start popping out in conversation because they're recently on my mind. I may even find ways to, almost artificially inject them into a sentence just to see if I can. So there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with Steve's approach here either, but I don't agree with the statement that this is a bad thing to do. In fact, I think it can be quite beneficial in times.
Need for comprehension, and it's the base upon which all other language skills are built. So no, don't try to use it right away. 21, he says TV shows, movies, newspapers, magazines are good supplements, but he says ultimately nothing compares to the benefits of speaking, like conversations. Again, I don't agree with that, because if you're into TV shows, movies, newspapers, and magazines, you're expanding your horizons, getting used to that new language and everything associated.
Also, if you're at that stage, you're probably past the intermediate. You're probably at a more lower advanced level. So by then, you don't really need a blog post to tell you how to learn a language.
With it, if you limit yourself to what you can say, it becomes a much more limited experience, and I don't think that's a good long-term strategy. Number 22, most people are helpful, let them help. Yeah, most people are helpful, but that French girl who went to Norway, she makes the point, and it's very important, make sure you're good before you get there. So if you go to Norway and you aren't very good in Norwegian, as helpful as I am sure the Norwegians are, they're going to speak to you in English because they think they're being helpful by speaking to you.
And it's easy to solve this problem. I don't speak English. And watch how quickly they're like, oh, okay. And then they'll try to figure out some other way to communicate with you. This is a very easy problem to solve. I don't know why people always bring this one up. You can I've done this in China. I've gone, I don't speak English. And because obviously people assume that and they'll be like, oh, okay. And they may ask me what language and I'll just make up some language I know is very unlikely that they speak, some rare European language. And if they somehow speak it, then I'll just be like, I gotta go. But in this case, you can just literally say you don't speak English and then they will fumble their way through and you'll fumble your way through. You'll get some great learning out of it. You'll force them to be a tutor for you for a little bit. Obviously, you're not going to build any long-term friendships, but I've got plenty of people that I met very early on when my Chinese was quite crap, where I spoke Chinese with them and I became friends with them, people in the taxi and stuff like that. So you don't have to wait until you're this advanced learner type of thing. Now, is it bad to wait? No. But is it also bad to try early? No. It's just more based on you as a person, what you want to do.
In English. So you can't treat random people as tutors.
Okay, so that's what he's talking about. Yes, you totally can. You totally can turn random people into tutors. It's very, very easy. I've had it done to me, and I've done it to plenty of people.
You have to get yourself to a level where people are comfortable speaking to you in the language that you're trying to learn. And number 23, there will be a lot of ambiguity and miscommunication. Yes, of course there will. That comes with the territory, as I mentioned earlier, that uncertainty, that's part of learning a language, and we shouldn't let it bother us. 24, these are the phases you go through to learn a foreign language. I mean, you can describe the phases any way you want. In my view, we have initial success because from zero, suddenly we understand a few things, we're able to say a few things. Then we go through a phase where we feel we're not making any progress whatsoever because there's so many low-frequency words that we need in order to understand the movie, in order to have meaningful conversations. And then all of a sudden we turn a corner and we have this feeling of, wow, I'm somewhere.
And this is also not very good way of showing, language growth as well, because what could quite happen is you could get to a B1 in a very specific domain of the language and be I don't know, an A1 in other areas that you haven't really concentrated on. Obviously, as you get better and better within your domain, it's going to drag up the other areas. But for example, when I watch Chinese Let's Plays, video games, I can understand a good 80, 90%, sometimes 100%. But then if you go make me watch other random videos and these are native level Chinese videos, but if I go watch, cooking videos type of thing where they're explaining all the ingredients, it's not something I really focus on. I'm going to be way, way lower type of thing because they're using verbs that I haven't really heard before. They're using obviously nouns and stuff like that, which I've never really practiced. So it's not this perfect thing that follows. And this is the same even with people of a native language. Like, I could talk about, like, high proficiency is certain things, and other things I'm not so proficient in. But obviously, as a native, you don't really notice this. But that's what expertise within a subject really is. It's just you're very, very proficient of the language of that specific expertise.
I'm B2. And these phases may be different for different people, but there is a gradual process of working towards success, however we define it. And finally, he says, number 25, find a way to make it fun. I would not put that as finally, I would put that as upfront. Figure out a way to enjoy the process. And at
Totally agree with this statement.
every stage, and we talked about stages, enjoy the process. So I, for example, at an early stage, I find it enjoyable to listen to our mini stories over and over again. Comes a point where I can no longer do that because we need repetition, but we need new things. And so I find it enjoyable to move on to things that are difficult, where I'm meeting some of the same words and phrases, but in many different contexts, and I'm learning about many things through the language, and I find that enjoyable. Obviously, when I have an opportunity to use the language, if I'm in the country or if I hear someone speaking a language that I've been learning, I'll immediately pounce on them and speak to them. And so that's also enjoyable. So it's important at every stage to find ways to enjoy the.
This is the same with anything in life. If you can't find a way to enjoy it as you're learning it, you're not going to make progress. Some people, I guess, can kind of push themselves through, but like realistically, you want to make it enjoyable.
Process, not just finally, but even at the very beginning. Everyone has their own approach to language learning. If it works for them, that's all that matters. And I'm going to leave with you 2 videos that I would suggest you have a.
Okay, so overall, I agree way more with Steve than this IAmMarkManson person. Like, the vast majority of what Steve said, like, I actually agree with. However, I can tell from this that Steve approaches languages in a different way to me. So he is a very, like, heavy comprehensible input. Like, literally, that's what the videos are there. So he's all about, you know, get as much input and then eventually one day start speaking. Well, I'm quite opposite. I'm more like, well, not opposite, but I'm more like the type where I like to keep things leveled out as I'm going. I like to keep my speaking in line with my listening capabilities. Now, will you make more progress with one method or the other? I feel like actually if you're going to do some active study as you're actually, you know, doing a lot of input, you're going to make faster progress. And I've kind of proven that to myself a few times now. Like, I've done 1,000 hours worth of Chinese and I'm way ahead of anyone who would have done pure comprehensible input in Chinese. But I'm also not fundamentalist about this. Like, I'm doing a Spanish challenge right now where I'm literally learning just Spanish via pure comprehensible input. Like, literally no active study or anything because I want to see how it goes type of thing. So I feel like both these types of ways that me and him have got work, and it's really down to you as the individual to like make your determination about how you want to go with these things. There is a few statements in here where I don't agree with Steve, but they were pretty far in between. So I'm going to say that this was an okay-ish language learning advice overall, because a few of his statements I do disagree with, and I'm going to put it into that playlist. Now, if there's any videos you guys want me to review, just drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, I will find you.